October 25th, 1944. Dawn broke over the Philippine Sea east of Samar Island. Commander Ernest Evans stood on the bridge of the USS Johnston, a Fletcher-class destroyer. Through his binoculars, he scanned the horizon. The sky was clear, the ocean calm. His ship and 6 escort carriers of Taffy 3 were supposed to provide air support for the troops landing on Leyte. Anti-submarine patrols, shore bombardment, routine duty for a destroyer built for combat but assigned to guard the slow, vulnerable baby flat tops. Then, at 0654, a lookout's voice cracked over the intercom. Pagoda masts on the horizon, multiple contacts, big ones. Evans raised his binoculars again. His blood went cold. Rising from the sea like apparitions from a nightmare were the distinctive superstructures of Japanese warships. Not one, not two, an entire fleet. 4 battleships, 8 cruisers, 11 destroyers, 23 warships in total, steaming directly toward Taffy 3 at full speed. At the center of that armada was Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, 72,000 tons of steel. 9 18-inch guns that could hurl shells weighing more than a small car over 25 miles. Each of those shells was larger than the entire Johnston. One direct hit would vaporize his destroyer, turn it into shrapnel and steam. Evans did the math in his head. Taffy 3 consisted of 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts. The carriers were merchant hulls with flight decks welded on top. Thin-skinned, slow, defenseless against naval gunfire. The destroyers were built for anti-submarine warfare and surface skirmishes, not fleet engagements. Johnston displaced 2,500 tons. She carried 5 5-inch guns and 10 torpedoes. Against Yamato's 18-inch cannons, those weapons were pea shooters. The radio crackled. Admiral Clifton Sprague's voice, tight with controlled panic, ordered all ships to make smoke and flee east at maximum speed. The carriers began belching thick black smoke from their stacks. The escorts laid down a chemical smoke screen. Within minutes, Taffy 3 disappeared into an artificial fog, but Evans knew it wouldn't matter. The Japanese were faster. They would close the distance. They would catch the carriers. They would destroy them. And then they would steamroll into Leyte Gulf and massacre the 130,000 American troops on the beaches. Unless someone stopped them, Evans keyed his microphone. All hands, this is the captain. The Japanese fleet is bearing down on us. We're going in. Prepare for surface action. There was no hesitation in his voice. No doubt. He'd told his crew on commissioning day, exactly 1 year earlier, that Johnston would be a fighting ship, that he intended to go in harm's way, that anyone who didn't want to go along should get off right then. No one had gotten off. Now they would see if those words meant anything. Evans gave the order. All ahead flank. Make your course 310. Prepare torpedoes for launch. The engine room responded immediately. Johnston's boilers roared. Her twin screws churned the water. She accelerated to 35 knots, smoke pouring from her stacks as she broke formation and charged alone toward the Japanese armada. Inside the fire control station, Lieutenant Robert Hagan watched the range indicators with growing horror. They were closing at combined speeds of over 50 knots. The Japanese fleet spread across the horizon like a wall of steel. Yamato dead ahead, the heavy cruiser Kumano to port, multiple destroyers screening the heavies, all of them opening fire. The first salvos fell short. Geysers of water erupted 200 yards ahead of Johnston's bow. Evans ordered hard right rudder. The destroyer heeled into the turn. The next salvo landed where Johnston would have been. More evasive action. Port rudder. Straighten out. Zigzag toward the shell, splashes because, as every destroyer captain knew, lightning doesn't strike twice in the same place. But this wasn't lightning. This was a hurricane of steel. Dozens of guns tracking Johnston's position, calculating lead angles, adjusting range. The water around the destroyer transformed into a forest of erupting geysers, some taller than Johnston's mast. Evans stood on the open bridge wing, hands gripping the rail, watching the enemy fleet grow larger. He was Cherokee, Creek blood in his veins. His crew called him the Chief, though never to his face. He'd grown up in Oklahoma, joined the Navy as an enlisted man, earned an appointment to Annapolis. He'd commanded USS Alden in the East Indies after Pearl Harbor. He'd seen combat, watched friends die, and he'd sworn that he would never, never take one step back from the Japanese. Now, sprinting alone into the teeth of the most powerful surface fleet ever assembled, he was keeping that promise. At 0710, Johnston closed to within 10,000 yards, torpedo range. Evans gave the order, "Fire all tubes." 10 Mark 15 torpedoes leaped from their tubes. White wakes streaked across the ocean toward Kumano. The heavy cruiser's captain saw them coming, tried to turn, too slow. 2 torpedoes struck the cruiser's bow. The explosions were catastrophic. Kumano's entire forward section disintegrated. The ship slewed sideways, out of control, trailing fire and smoke. Dead in the water, Evans didn't wait to confirm the kill. He ordered a hard turn to port, bringing Johnston's 5-inch guns to bear. The destroyer's main battery opened up. 45 rounds per minute per gun. 225 shells screaming toward the crippled Kumano in 5 minutes of continuous fire. Many missed. Some ricocheted off the cruiser's armored belt. But dozens found weak points: superstructure, deck plating, bridge windows. Kumano's upper works were shredded. Then Johnston took her first hit. The shell came from Yamato, an 18-inch monster that had been tracking Johnston for 3 minutes. The round struck low on the starboard side, just above the waterline. The impact was like being hit by a freight train. The entire ship shuddered. Metal screamed. The shell passed completely through the hull without exploding, punching an entry hole the size of a car and an exit wound twice as large. Before Evans could assess the damage, 2 more shells arrived. These were 6-inch rounds from Yamato's secondary battery. They exploded on contact. One hit the bridge. The blast killed 3 men instantly. Shrapnel shredded Evans's left hand, taking off 2 fingers. His shirt was blown completely off his body. The concussion threw him against the bulkhead. He got up, refused the morphine the corpsman tried to give him. Someone wrapped his hand. He kept commanding. The second 6-inch shell struck the engine room. One of Johnston's 2 boilers exploded. Steam pressure dropped. Speed fell from 35 knots to 17. The destroyer was crippled but still fighting. For the next 10 minutes, Johnston hid in her own smoke and a fortuitous rain squall. The crew worked frantically. Damage control teams shored up bulkheads. Electricians restored power to the forward guns. The 3rd turret was permanently disconnected from fire control and had to be aimed manually, but it was still operational. At 0725, Johnston emerged from the smoke and immediately engaged the battleship Congo at 7,000 yards, 30 rounds. No confirmed hits on the battleship's armored hull, but enough to draw fire away from the fleeing carriers. Evans saw the other American destroyers making their own torpedo runs. USS Hole, USS Heermann, the destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts, a ship so small and lightly armed she had no business being in a surface engagement. They were all charging into the Japanese guns. Johnston fell in with them. Despite her damage, despite running on 1 engine, despite having expended all her torpedoes. Evans turned his crippled ship toward the enemy and joined the second attack wave. By 0820, the American destroyers had fired all their torpedoes and were retreating south through their smokescreen. Johnston nearly collided with Heermann in the obscured visibility. Then Evans spotted Gambier Bay, one of the escort carriers, dead in the water and under fire from multiple Japanese cruisers. He turned Johnston toward the action. The destroyer engaged the heavy cruiser Chikuma at point-blank range, 5-inch guns against 8-inch cruiser cannons. David versus Goliath. For 35 minutes, Johnston poured over 600 rounds into Chikuma's superstructure. The cruiser's bridge caught fire. Her fire control was knocked out, but Chikuma's return fire was devastating. Shell after shell slammed into Johnston's thin hull. The aft engine failed. The main mast collapsed. Gun turret 2 was destroyed, killing everyone inside. Evans moved his command to the fantail. The bridge was uninhabitable. Smoke and flames poured from every hatch. But Johnston kept firing, kept fighting. At 0930, Evans saw something that made his blood freeze. 7 Japanese destroyers, led by the light cruiser Yahagi, were forming up for a torpedo attack on the remaining carriers. Fresh ships. Undamaged. Fast. Johnston limped toward them at 10 knots. 1 engine, no torpedoes, 3 operational guns, against 7 destroyers and a light cruiser. The math was impossible. The outcome certain. Evans didn't care. Johnston crossed the Japanese formation's T, attempting to block their approach. Yahagi and her destroyers turned broadside, brought all guns to bear. At that range, they couldn't miss. The first salvo destroyed Johnston's turret 2 completely. The second knocked out her remaining engine. The third started fires that spread through the ammunition magazines. By 0945, Johnston was dead in the water. No power, no propulsion, no communications. Just a burning hulk with a crew that refused to quit. Evans gave the order to abandon ship. The crew went over the side, into water already fouled with fuel oil, into seas where sharks circled. They inflated life rafts, clung to debris, watched their ship die. Evans was last seen shouting steering orders through a hatch to aft steering, trying to coax one final maneuver from his destroyed vessel. Then Johnston capsized. The hull rolled. She went down bow first, stern rising briefly into the air before sliding beneath the waves. At 10:10, Johnston was gone. As she sank, the Japanese destroyer Yukikaze passed close by the survivors in the water. The crew of Yukikaze came to attention, saluted, a warrior's acknowledgement of courage. Commander Evans was never found. Some survivors claimed they saw him in a damaged lifeboat. Others said he was hit by shell fire before abandoning ship. The Navy eventually declared him dead. His body was never recovered. Of Johnston's crew of 327 men, only 141 survived. They spent 50 hours in the water before rescue arrived. Some died of wounds, some from exposure, some from sharks. 92 men, including Evans, were alive when Johnston sank, but were never seen again. The battle off Samar lasted 3 hours. When it ended, the Japanese center force withdrew, retreated, turned around, and headed back through San Bernardino Strait without achieving any of their objectives. Admiral Takeo Kurita, commanding the Japanese fleet from Yamato's bridge, believed he'd been fighting a much larger American force. Fleet carriers, heavy cruisers, the aggressive torpedo attacks, the suicidal charges, the volume of fire. It convinced him that he was facing the main strength of the American Third Fleet, not a handful of escort carriers and destroyers. He was wrong. Taffy 3 was all that stood between him and complete victory. 6 baby flat tops, 3 destroyers, 4 destroyer escorts, and they'd turned back the largest surface fleet Japan had assembled since Midway. The cost was brutal. Taffy 3 lost 2 escort carriers, 2 destroyers, and 1 destroyer escort. 792 men dead, 768 wounded. But the invasion force at Leyte was saved. The 130,000 troops on the beaches survived. The Philippine campaign continued. Johnston received the Presidential Unit Citation. Commander Ernest Evans was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. The citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life, above and beyond the call of duty as commanding officer of the USS Johnston in action against major units of the enemy Japanese fleet during the battle off Samar on October 25, 1944. Years later, historians would analyze the battle off Samar. They would study the tactical decisions, the weapons employment, the communications. They would debate why Kurita withdrew, what he was thinking, what intelligence he had or lacked. But the men who survived Johnston knew the answer. They knew why the Japanese turned back. It wasn't tactics. It wasn't intelligence. It was raw, uncompromising courage. It was a destroyer captain who charged alone into an entire fleet, who refused to retreat, who fought his ship to destruction rather than let the enemy pass. The Japanese commanders were stunned because they'd never encountered anything like it. They'd fought battles across the Pacific, engaged the Chinese, the British, the Dutch, the Americans. They'd seen bravery, seen sacrifice. but they'd never seen a single destroyer deliberately sprint towards certain death against overwhelming odds. Johnston's attack violated every principle of naval warfare. You don't charge battleships with destroyers. You don't engage heavy cruisers at point-blank range. You don't interpose yourself between superior forces and your own fleet. Those are suicide tactics, textbook examples of what not to do. But Commander Ernest Evans wasn't following textbooks. He was following a different code, a warrior's code that said, you protect those who depend on you. You stand your ground. You go down fighting. You never, never surrender the field to the enemy. That code meant something to the Japanese commanders. Bushido, the way of the warrior. They recognized it when they saw it, respected it, and that respect manifested as caution, as uncertainty, as the decision to withdraw rather than press an attack against an enemy who demonstrated such ferocious determination. The technical analysts would note that Johnston's torpedo attack on Kumano forced that cruiser out of the battle, that the destroyer's gunfire disrupted Japanese fire control, that the smoke screens and evasive maneuvers bought precious time for the carriers to escape. All true, all tactically significant, but the real impact was psychological. The Japanese fleet had the firepower to annihilate Taffy 3 in 30 minutes. They had the speed to run down the fleeing carriers. They had numerical superiority, armor superiority, weapons superiority. They should have won decisively. Instead, they faced destroyers that refused to die. That kept coming, kept firing, kept attacking even after sustaining damage that should have sent them to the bottom. The Americans fought like cornered animals, like men who had nothing to lose and everything to protect. That changed the equation, made the Japanese commanders reconsider, wonder what else might be waiting over the horizon, what other forces might arrive, what trap might be closing. So they withdrew, turned away from what should have been an easy victory. And in doing so, they validated Commander Evans's sacrifice, proved that courage, even suicidal courage, can achieve strategic results that firepower alone cannot. The story of Johnston and her crew became legend in the Navy. Every officer candidate studies the battle off Samar, learns about the destroyer captain who charged alone, who fought against impossible odds, who gave everything to protect those under his care. The lesson isn't about tactics. It's about character, about the kind of leader who inspires such loyalty that a crew will follow him into hell, about the kind of courage that doesn't calculate odds or assess probabilities, about the warrior spirit that says some things are worth dying for. Commander Ernest Evans understood that. His crew understood that. And when the moment came, when history demanded everything they had, they gave it willingly. The Japanese commanders were stunned because they witnessed something rare and terrible. They saw warriors who would not quit, could not be intimidated, would die fighting rather than yield 1 inch of ocean to the enemy. That kind of courage changes battles, changes wars, changes the course of history. Johnston went down fighting. Her crew went down fighting. Their sacrifice saved thousands of lives, protected an invasion, helped win a campaign, advanced the cause of victory in the Pacific. And 75 years later, their story endures. A reminder that sometimes, against all logic and all reason, a single ship, crewed by brave men, can stand against an empire and prevail. Not because they were stronger, not because they were better armed, but because they refused to be beaten, refused to retreat, refused to let the enemy pass. That refusal, that defiance, that absolute commitment to duty and honor, that is what stunned the Japanese commanders. That is what turned the tide at Samar. That is what we remember. Commander Ernest Evans charged an entire convoy alone. And in doing so, he showed the world what American destroyermen were made of. If this story moved you, we would be honored if you would like this video. It helps us continue sharing these important stories of courage and sacrifice. Please take a moment to tell us in the comments where you're watching from, your country, your city. We love hearing from our viewers around the world. Did you or someone in your family serve during World War II? Perhaps you knew a sailor or heard stories about the Pacific War from veterans. Share your memories and thoughts below. These personal connections to history matter deeply. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to honor the memory of Commander Ernest Evans, his crew, and the thousands of sailors who fought with such extraordinary courage in the battle off Samar. These stories must never be forgotten.